and a overall 3% for the SCSA, which was negotiated last year. So the salaries bumped from $14,135,000 to $14,580,000 for a total of $445,000 increase.
And that would be if you had teachers or people who are supporting special education within the district, in the building, their salaries are in this line, yes?
100%, yes. That's all all district salaries are in that line.
Which, do you have the number of the total head count? That's probably 250 or something like that.
Overall, in any given year, I was surprised at this. It's almost 400 employees, but that includes camp and everything. But regular school year employees and administration, it's right around 250.
Okay.
Transportation has increased $77,000. That's an 8% increase, and that's due to a contractual increase by AA Transportation, and we've increased our repair line to cover the cost of repairs. Facilities and utilities saw a decrease from $845,000 to $832,000, a nearly 30% decrease, and the decrease is all in electricity, but we did increase some custodial supplies and custodial contracted services. The decrease in electricity was $39,000. Special education out-of-district tuitions. We budgeted this year $805,000, and as of today, it has increased to $1,221,000, an increase of $416,000, or a 52% increase. And I can tell this community right now that we have no students that are placed out of district that we believe, as a school system, shouldn't be placed out of district. These are legitimate educational needs of these students. Unfortunately, they're expensive placements. And I'm going to talk about this in a minute. It's on the next slide. And then finally, we have a 9% increase in athletics, legal, technology, miscellaneous, from $883,000 to $962,000, or $78,000 increase. Now, at this point, we haven't really put a fine point to this. I've asked the principals to provide me what they believe they need, and that's what's here. When we get to May and June, we're going to have to talk about how we make this budget work. So if I go to the next page, any question? I'm sorry, go ahead,
I have
please.
a question. So looking at the first line item, salaries, with an increase of 3%, what is the enrollment doing year over year in the high school, the middle school, and by school?
I don't have that in front of me right now. Our enrollment is kind of stabilized overall district-wide. It ranges between 1,300 and 1,400 total students. And our high school, I believe, is at 385. Our middle school is around 360. Elementary and early learning center each around 300.
So if the high school is at 385, that's telling me classes are averaging below 100 students per class.
Yes. In the early learning center elementary, they're all averaging right around 100.
Okay.
Middle school is still averaging around 120. So the overall population coming into the district has decreased over the last 10 years, yes.
Okay. So I see when we're looking at things that are changing staffing-wise, the high school enrollment is dropping, yet we're losing people in the elementary school, but we're not making any changes in the high school.
Well, we're not losing any people in the elementary school. The only thing we're doing is shifting our resource the only change we made is library to health in the elementary school. The difficulty with high school is making the schedule work. And,
Yeah.
you know, that's the problem with whether you have 410 students and 380 students, you still have to offer X amount of electives, X amount of core courses to make the schedule work. And so, if we got into a very difficult financial situation, I would say that we would have to look at that. And I've talked to the high school principal, assistant principal, Mr. Goyette, the middle school principal, about down the road, we may have to be looking and saying, we may have to reshape the staffing at those building levels, at those buildings. At this point in time, though, I would not recommend that. I don't think we're in a position to do that at this point in time. But if that population continues to go down, then we may have to look at it. By the way, that's also part of the restructuring and what we have to look at. If we restructure our staffing, go down to 3 schools, then you might have some more flexibility around staffing and how you staff each building. We good? So the next slide. The committee's asked about this information for the last month, and so I just want to go over how volatile out-of-district placements and even in-district special education situations occur. But in 2017, we budgeted $866,000, and at the end of the year, it actually went down by about $6,000. In 2018, we budgeted $936,000, and it actually expanded to $1,039,000. The following year, just the opposite happened. We budgeted $967,000, and it ended up being $900,000. This year, we started with a budget of $805,000, and it has ballooned to $1,078,000. And now, next year, we're looking at a budget of $1,221,000 entering next year. And so with that volatility, it becomes very difficult for us to budget special education. So what Jim, Tim, and Nancy and I discussed was setting the ceiling at $1 million. That we operate and we budget $1 million for this. And if it goes above $1 million, that we use the town's special education stabilization account to fill the rest of that void. And as you can tell by the fluctuation of this, it does fluctuate up and down below $1 million. And so if it fluctuates below $1 million, we still budget $1 million and we backfill that stabilization account. Now, over the next several years, it's probably going to be above $1 million. And so I have to work with the town and with Jim to determine how we're going to backfill that stabilization on the town. But for us, in planning, setting that level at $1 million will make a significant difference in how we plan and how we budget going forward.
So how much is in the stabilization fund?
Right now, there's $350,000 in that stabilization account.
But
So
it
all
wouldn't be
it takes is-
stabilization, it would be an account that's been specifically set up for special education?
Yes, the town has established a special education stabilization account in which they've set aside $350,000.
So one more out-of-district placement like that could put us beyond that.
Yes.
So how do we handle that?
Well, that's something we're working on. The biggest thing is, right now, the economy's strong. Revenues are still where they need to be. It's when the economy takes a hit, how are we going to backfill that account? But right now, free cash is strong, and so we're hoping that through free cash, they'll be able to backfill that account. But that's more a question for Jim Smith, the town manager working with FinCom, and the selectmen.
If nothing else, I would read into that, the right people are talking about how do we utilize an account, a stabilization account specifically set up for this to do better budgeting within the town. And so, as you all talk about it, if you figure different numbers, but to sort out what's the appropriate use and have folks agree on it seems to make a great deal of sense. That's- a question on the growth. At 1.2, you made the statement that these out-of-district placements, that really is what's appropriate for the students that are doing that. Do you reach a point where you say perhaps we need to be able to develop more in-house services? Or is it that each placement is so unique, it's not a question that you could bring some of it in-house with the right services?
We're always looking at how we keep students in district. But you're right, for the latest round, these are individual student needs that we cannot provide those services. There's a point where we just simply can't provide that service. And that's where we are, I would say, with all of our students. Now, there's several students who are looking to bring back into the district, and there's a good chance that a couple of them will come back next year. But we've just got to make sure that they get the services that they need, get the care that they need before we bring them back.
And it's not as though you could find 3 or 4 have some specific need that if we developed that program, it would be cheaper because the needs are so unique for each one.
What happened 10 years ago is that there was more sharing within districts. And then what most districts ended up doing was build their own programs. And so when I first arrived here, we had several students from other towns that were part of our program. All of those towns built their own programs. We continue to look and explore with other towns. We have one student now that goes to Grafton. They have a program there. It's a better environment for that student. It's in a public school, and it's something that for us to replicate that program would be too cost prohibitive, but they have the program. But we are always looking at that. The next page. So again, this is just a different visualization of our budget. And it really just shows that the vast majority of our budget is in salaries. And then the other 4 pieces of the pie are all relatively in the same ballpark in the budget.
What percentage of the salaries is direct, hands-on classroom, student-facing versus admin versus district support, which would include, maintenance and cafeteria?
We can get that information for you to break it out.
When you do, can we break up direct contact with students, then, I don't know if the appropriate, but what I'm thinking is the teachers and the aides, that I wouldn't want to see that as one bucket.
But there's teachers, aides, and then there are other
Guidance.
guidance, ancillary.
Yeah, and I agree with what you were saying. I think it's more than just a category that is direct hands-on.
Absolutely.
That's
We can break that out for you. I just need to know specifically. So you want administration and sort of like the,
So you'd have classroom teachers, you'd have,
Is it instructional versus operational?
Yeah.
okay.
So I think that's what you're
Okay.
looking at, is the
Or the
people that are
different
instructing
unions?
versus
No.
what helps the buildings flow
okay.
in the district.
And I'd break it out a little bit more, because I think you want administration broken out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want cafeteria,
Cafeteria
custodian,
maintenance can be lumped together, I think. but-
and
facility.
bus drivers,
Yeah.
kind of that category, direct instruction, but that'll include guidance counselors.
School admin support would be,
With administration,
yeah, okay.
right? I would,
I would
Although
probably
you
put
still
that- I
need-
would probably see that as support, but
we'll break it out.
I'm
We'll,
gonna move 'em.
we'll,
As long as I know where they are, I can
Yeah.
pull them.
Sure.
out.
yeah, no, you want, do you want special education separated out, in-building special education separated, or we want that all just under instruction?
I'd like to have it separated.
I think, yeah. I mean, when I ask that way, I'm looking at direct classroom.
That's such a big piece of the puzzle, and it's, for such a small group of kids, I think it's important to keep that here.
To me,
'cause
that's in the
real-
same
That's
group
the real
as
changeable number.
Guidance and
Versus the-
IAs, and
Yeah.
that they, I mean, there might be multiple students that they service or a group that way, but direct classroom versus,
So you're really talking about teachers and instructional IAs. Then you have special education IAs, special education teachers. So I just want to,
guidance, yeah, I mean, that way.
guidance,
I
It's
prefer guidance
student-facing.
separated out. It's
Yeah.
easier if you separate it and you can add them together if you're.
Yeah.
Can you take a swing at what sounds like about 7 to 10 groups? I made that number up. It's a relatively small
do
number.
we have the SCSA broken out? We do, right?
I do.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Sure.
It's gonna,
And then
No,
if-
no, we have that, remember you gave me that?
yeah.
We have it with the total.
But I think
We have
you
it broken
had
out
two groups
by-
and then broken out
I
by-
can get this for you easily, I have.
So
I
if
have
if
it.
you mail it to us in the next couple of days,
Yeah.
without starting a debate in email, folks take a look at it and get right back to Nancy and say, yeah, that's what I was looking for, can you split again?
Thank you.
Is it
Yeah.
possible to label the special ed tuitions as out of district?
Sure.
There's a difference, I mean,
Yep.
yeah, it may be splitting hairs, but I think it's important that people understand, I mean, that's specifically out of
I think
district.
the entire presentation is speaking towards out of district, and
Yeah.
we should say that almost on every slide.
Yeah.
We're at.
Sure.
What Nancy and I do is we look at STA and what that total is when we're doing this. We look at the SCSA and what that total is, and then we look at administration. That's kind of how the three buckets we look at, and we'll just slice those buckets up a little bit more for you.
Yeah, don't you have it broken down by teacher per school, right? So at
Oh,
the end
yeah.
of that,
In
there should be
payroll, I can pull
there
any
should be
report
an
you
amount,
want,
yeah.
I can pull all these.
We can slice and dice this any way you
Yeah.
want it. We just need to know specifically how you want it sliced for you.
And that's the only thing I'll worry
Yep.
about is that could be misleading.
Okay, the next page. The next page is a revenue comparison. So this is how we intend to pay for the budget. And so for this year, at the start of this year, we allocated $1,614,000 out of grants and revolving, and I'll go into more detail over the next several slides. Chapter 70 is the state funding for our school district. At the start of the year, or in June, we earmarked $5,466,000, and the town's portion is $10,607,000. And that's a $400,000 increase from the previous year.
And
Below-
the town's portion or the town's contribution to education is clearly larger than the 10.6. You've got BVT and all sorts of other items.
Correct, yes. And the state factors that all in. The state, when they determine per pupil cost, they factor in the cost of benefits, medical benefits. They factor in the cost of the town hall. They put a factor on that as well.
They wouldn't put per pupil costs, do they bring in the BVT or the Norfolk Aggie?
That's separate.
Right.
That's all calculated separately. So, again, we have parking fees, bus fees, aftercare revolving account that we utilize, school choice. I want to really bring your attention to really two key accounts, school choice and circuit breaker. Those are revolving accounts that we allocate a significant amount of revenue. School choice, the initial budget, we allocated $454,000, and circuit breaker, $375,000. As I showed you on a previous slide, our special education out-of-district tuitions increased by $271,000. And so we have to plug in, if we spent all of our budget, where we would pay for that. And so if you look in the middle column, as of December of this year, of this past year, Our grants and revolvings would have to increase to $1,850,000. Chapter 70 increased by about $13,000. That was an increase that we received, and that was voted on at the fall town meeting, and the town's portion remained the same. If we spent every single penny in our budget and we did not receive any additional extraordinary relief out of circuit breaker, then we'd have to use a full $706,000 out of school choice and a full $404,000 out of circuit breaker to cover the full cost. I'll explain this in more detail in future slides, but I wanted to point that out to you.
Talking about current budget year.
Current budget year,
Where we are now,
where we are now.
as it stands, in order to balance it, you're coming back and saying we want to spend more of school choice.
Correct. And so for next year, we basically, we have basically the same amount of grant and revolving money, $1,606,000. The state, the Chapter 70 number that you have in front of you is the governor's number that came out in January, just a week ago, and that's $5,519,000. And we've estimated that we're going to receive $400,000 from the town again this year, which the town will provide $11,007,000, for a total of $18,133,000. So our understanding is because our special education costs went up so much in one given year, we will receive extraordinary relief of at least $85,000. It's not guaranteed. We'll be applying for it in the next couple of weeks. So obviously that $85,000 will allow us to keep more money in our school choice account.
Would that 85,000 come in this fiscal year or next?
This fiscal year. Okay. What I'm going to do now is take you through all of the revolving accounts. The first two I'm going to do in more detail. The rest of them are all very stable, sustainable accounts for the next 5 years and beyond.
With specific purposes.
With specific purposes, correct. So let's start with school choice. We've had 4 good years where we've had to rely below what we budgeted for out of the school choice line. So in FY18, we had a beginning balance of $674,000. That year, we had a receivable of $242,000, but we only expended $120,000 of that account. So the budget grew from $674,000 to $796,000. In 2019, we had a receivable of $330,000 and used a total of $206,000 out of school choice, which again allowed that revolving account to grow to $920,000. And the way I think the community needs to look at this is kind of like the school's free cash or stabilization account. And we've been very protective of this account so that we can sustain our staffing and our programming for the foreseeable future. Now, if you look at 2020, we have a receivable of $349,000. However, we have an additional, again, if we had to spend all of our money, we'd have to use an additional $241,000 for the additional out-of-district tuitions, $25,000 for the activity bus that we've purchased. We already had encumbered $109,000 for our district tuitions, and we encumbered $330,000 for staffing.
So help me understand what you mean by the encumbrances of 109,330.
So every year, we budget X amount of dollars out of school choice in the operating budget.
That's the
And we
330.
just put it somewhere. And so we put $330 under the high school salary line, and we, on paper, put 109.
In order to balance the budget, we've used 330, and we did in 19 also. You don't show it as an encumbrance because you're predicting we'll use 206 of the 330, sort of.
That's what we exactly used. We had budgeted $330. We actually budgeted more than that. but we ended up not having to use it because we had, every year, as you know, we budget for legal services and special education. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've used virtually none of that money. And so we were able to keep that money in our school choice revolving account.
That's the 330, what's the 109?
Again, we just put it as out-of-district placements for convenience, for accounting convenience.
Sorry, so what we're really saying is when we do the budget, we'll talk about using $439,000 of school choice. When you put it as lines in the budget, you'll put 330 in salary and you'll put 109 in out-of-district placements.
Correct.
But in order to balance the budget in 20, we would expect to see 439.
Yes. Yes. Now, I don't believe today that we'll have $563,000 at the end of this year. We should receive extraordinary relief, and we should have some money remaining.
Sorry, you just said you don't believe you'll have 500,000. Where's that number coming from?
The very bottom of
Got it.
if we spent every penny, this account would be down to 563. We're confident that we're going to receive the extraordinary relief, and so right there alone, that would be, in all likelihood, at least 85,000. But we wanted to carry this out for you, just in case. So if you go to FY21, if we started with 563, it's an estimate that we'd receive 320. It just depends on the number of students we have under school choice.
How many students does that normally represent?
So in FY20, there's 55 students. In FY19, there was 52. In FY20, there's 55. We've had a number of students that have moved out of town in high school that have allowed that number to stay up there. And then we also get the average money we receive for a school choice student is $5,000. And then students that come in that receive special education services, those services are charged back to the sending town that we will receive through school choice. So if we go to FY21, we start with 563, hopefully more like 663 or 665. We receive 320. I put in the rollover at $60,000, meaning money that we do not expend out of the budget next year at the end of the year. We put in $10,000 for expenses. The reason why that is there is in July we'll close the books for FY20. Any bills that come in after that, we take out of school choice because we can't take it out of the operating fund. And so that's why we have $10,000 as a placeholder. We budgeted $124,000 for out-of-district placement and $330,000 encumbered under salaries. If that all took place, as it's written here, we'd have an ending balance of $479, carry that up to the next year, and you see how we go across. All right? Any questions on that? Okay. Circuit breaker. Again, circuit breaker you can carry over for 2 years. And so in FY18, we started with a balance of $233,000. We had a receivable of $414,000. We spent $517,000, leaving us a balance of $130,000. In FY19, we had a receivable of $429,000. We expended $498,000, leaving us a balance with $61,000. And now this year in FY20, because of the increase in out-of-district tuitions, they changed the formula. We got less money than we thought we were going to get in our receivable. And we anticipate using all of this funds because of the increase. Now I want to bring your attention to FY21. Because of these increases, this is a conservative figure that we have of $469,000. This figure is just what we anticipate receiving from our out-of-district tuitions. This does not factor in what we will receive from in-district students that exceed the 4 times the per pupil expenditure. It also does not include, under the new law that was passed, the new ed reform law, where we're receiving just $30 a pupil, but many urban centers are receiving far more money. They're gonna start reimbursing for out-of-district special education transportation. They're going to roll this out over a 4-year period, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100% reimbursement. I'm not exactly sure exactly what that means. But when they were doing the calculations last year, and if it was fully funded, they anticipated we would receive $100,000. So if that was correct, we could be looking at a potential of $25,000. So in FY '21, we could be looking at a receivable of closer to $500,000 than $470,000. But I would not count on anything yet until we actually see what the number is. I also want to point out to everybody that we budgeted in FY '21 $375,000 out of this account. So when we get to our gap at the end of this presentation, if we do get $500,000, we will be able to use potentially an additional $100,000 out of school choice to offset the gap. And again, these numbers that you see here in front of you are based on, the receivable is based on our current out-of-district placements. We factored in if any students leave the district, but we didn't factor in any additions because we have no idea what that would look like. And you see that, and again, if in FY '20 they provide 50% reimbursement for transportation, what will that be? In 2023, 75%, in 2024, 100% reimbursement. So these figures are very conservative,
Making a lot more money.
and they should go up. Well, they've made a commitment to do this. Now, you're right, though.
That's all.
They make commitments, and then if the economy turns, you could see a reduction in some of this money, because that's what's happened in the
So
past.
shouldn't we be assuming that we're not getting it? Since it's not in place, we haven't seen any way that they're thinking of funding it.
They clearly, the governor's budget has fully funded these amounts for next year. The governor. So generally speaking, that's the lowest level you're going to receive. Now, again,
But if they tier that for districts and all,
I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
I just know that
concerned about
I'm very
basing our budget on stuff we don't. Well, for instance, I'm just looking at this too. We're going conservative on receivables, but we're kind of going, for me, I see us looking at the higher end of the reimbursement for circuit breaker. Shouldn't we be looking more at the average of what we've done versus, I'd rather be conservative on what we're thinking of getting back.
that's exactly what I just said, though. We are being conservative. This,
On both receivables and on reimbursement? 'Cause that's not what I heard, that's why. I
no,
don't
this
see it.
$469,000
Yeah,
is a conservative figure.
right, but that's receivables for out-of-district placements to us from the state, is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay,
through circuit breaker.
okay.
So I anticipate that it's only gonna be higher than that based on the governor's budget.
Where have we trended normally?
It-
I mean,
well, you see it.
I know it's all over the map, but I mean, what's our typical, where have we over, say, the past 5 years, 7 years, where have we been as far as funding for?
Well, you see it, the
Circuit
3 years prior, we had 414,000, 429,000, and 343,000. So that's what our receivable has been.
Right, but based on their formula that they use, is it a percentage?
Well, it depends
Right.
on the student population and what we're spending, so
Yeah.
that
Oh,
varies.
I understand
So-
that, but it's a percentage of that, so it's
So the
it's
way,
4 times your,
the way it works is the state will set, let's say the state says $50,000 is the 4 times the standard per pupil expenditure.
Okay.
Anything above that $50,000, we will receive 75% reimbursement in next year's budget. That's what the governor budgeted. But to your point, depending on where the finances are, that percentage can fluctuate. But right now, this current year, it was 75% reimbursement. The budget number for next year is 75% reimbursement. And the state is kind of in a bind. There are several urban school districts in the state that planned on suing the state because they felt that the Ed Reform Act of '93 was no longer valid because of special education and healthcare costs weren't factored in. And so the state is kind of in a bind that they really do have to find a way to support special education in the larger urban school districts. And that's the balance they kind of came up with in the new law. So I think for the next several years, I see them supporting this. And I think for us, I think we probably can look at these numbers and think they're going to be pretty legitimate for the next 3 or 4 years.
Do you recall a year recently where it's been less than 75%?
It's, yes. Just a couple of years ago, it was 70%, and several years ago it was 65%. One year was 62%, but that was in the 2010, 2011, 2012, and it became very complicated because at that time we were getting ARA money, if anybody remembers that, which was federal money to bail out states. But we've been pretty stable over the last several years.
And these numbers don't include the 85,000 in extraordinary relief.
No. Now, so to give you the answer, in 2017, the state reimbursed 73%. In 2018, 72%. In 2019, 74.4%. In 2020, 75%. And that's the target, and that's what their goal is.
You talked about some students leaving the district or aging out, and that you've taken account of that.
Correct.
But you don't have the students coming in. I'm not sure how much of the younger kids coming in add to when they be saying that poorly, but is there some sort of equilibrium that even though somebody comes off, just as soon somebody comes on,
Well, you can see by just the trend that we showed.
more coming on?
Well, it's not so much that more are coming on, it's just that we've had a number of very expensive ones.
So
And the
is, as
prices
our
of those
trend,
facilities are going
yeah,
up too.
and so the trend in
Correct.
acuity is that we're going up?
Oh, yeah.
In dollars, but not necessarily students.
Right, but what I'm saying acuity, so each student, the amount that it's costing to provide the services is going up.
Yes,
So we may still have 13 students, but now, you
yes,
know,
Correct.
it's their level of acuity demands that we're supplying these services plus these services and all of that, so that's what I'm
correct,
asking.
yes. So, I'm feeling good about this, believe it or not.
We're not done yet, don't worry.
I am,
We've only just
I'm, as long as we can work out the special education revolving account, we will stabilize our budget. At least I believe we will. And we'll have a little bit more control over how we do things.
So where did you say our population has gone as far as out-of-district placements, or those, or at least let me back that up. The students who are then, their tuition is then eligible for the circuit breaker. How many students have we traditionally had over the past few years?
Is this the number here?
That's out of district.
So in FY19, we had 20, and currently we have 15. And so that just goes to show you that it's not the number of students, it's the programs that they are. We have situations where we have a residential placement that is in excess of $230,000 for one student.
Mm.
And so you have those situations where they can be very costly. But,
That's what we reported on circuit breaker, not necessarily the number of students.
oh,
Right? I know. Do you know what I mean?
but so that,
It's just-
I'm sorry. So that's the number of students that are reported to circuit breaker. There are a couple of out-of-district placements that are less below the threshold.
Right.
So I think this number is, I think there's 2 students that fall into that category, which is more like 17. So,
You can't put every student into circuit breaker,
Right.
so
Only if they
Yeah,
that's,
that's,
right.
so the, I'll,
So I've just looked at our circuit breaker since 12, and our numbers have gone as far as total eligible expenses. 12, it was 950, and come 16, it was almost 1.4.
so that's what we can put in.
Right,
I'm sorry, what did you say was 1.4?
1 million for 2016, according to the Department of Ed.
And so we get whatever the percentage was. I don't know what the
Right.
percentage was back
I
then.
don't know if they gave me a percentage on that. I was just looking at how our expenses have
so
changed,
we-
because the number of students have, if for anything, has tended to trend down a little.
We-
But the amount has been significantly higher. Yeah.
As you can just see by the previous trend that I showed you, it does fluctuate. In my 10 years here, we've averaged anywhere between, on average, any given year, between 11 and 15 and 16 students, depending on the year.
FY '20, we had 12 out of district.
To start.
Right.
To start.
Right.
And now we have more. So again, if transportation is really what they say, and they can fund it, these receivables will all be in excess of $500,000. And that's if all the students stay within district, and that doesn't include if there are new students coming in. Unless you have a specific question on the next few slides, and please stop me. Bus fees are very stable. We charge $180 per pupil in grades 7 through 12 who take the bus. We budget $45,000 annually to offset transportation.
And you show growth here, but what you don't show is the, on occasion, new transportation equipment that's, would potentially be purchased from here, or?
You could. We like to keep balances in these accounts for just that. Something comes up unusual, this is a place where we can potentially use some of that money, yes. For transportation.
So, the parties struggle with this one, and I know the numbers aren't gonna change. It's more the methodology is, if enrollment is tending to go down, these numbers tell me that enrollment's going down, but we expect more kids to take the bus. And I fail to believe that that's the trend.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that number, that receivable number, we should probably adjust it downward to reflect that. And again, I keep going back to restructuring. One of the things that if we restructure, there's potential with dwindling enrollment to reduce the number of runs we have. And so
Again.
that's another area,
Potential.
But
I'd
again,
rather see these numbers trend down to what we actually think is happening until we make the decision that we're going to, I mean, if the school system does restructure, then they can start to reverse, but I'd rather see these numbers go the way trends are
Oh,
pointing them.
I'm not looking, I think you're right. I think it's just a basic math formula here.
Okay.
However, how we bring students to school and how we structure the bus runs I kind of went, it was an apples and oranges situation.
We're not talking about a lot of dollars here,
No.
but again, $5,000 either way makes a big difference, we're
Yeah.
learning, so.
Yeah.
We'll take a look at that.
What I'm looking at is sustainability, and I believe that this account is sustainable for the next 5 years and beyond. Parking fees. Again, we charge $100 for students to park. We use these parking fees under grounds and maintenance, and then we occasionally use them for a big item. So we budget annually $9,000, but recently we had to fill that back parking lot. Remember, we had the water treatment spot that we used some of this money. And we also used some of this money to pay for our truck to get a new bed because the salt eats it away, but that's a perfect use for this money. But this is sustainable for the next 5 years and beyond.
And I'll make the same point with this one.
Right.
If enrollment's declining, why are the receivables staying the same? I mean,
Yep.
how
Yeah,
can
we'll
we
look
have
at
more kids driving if we have less kids coming to school? I don't understand that. So let's put the trend in as
Sure.
what we expect it to be instead of a flat number.
Okay. Next, aftercare revolving. So again, we use this fund, we budget $130,000 annually.
Are you on aftercare?
Thank you.
And we actually did adjust this one down, as you can see the trend, because we have lower enrollment. But we do have more and more kids participating in this program. So even though the numbers are down, the Elementary and Early Learning Center have already gone through, and we're already basing it on 100. But we were, ironically, a little more conservative with this number. But we use $130,000 to offset electricity and any additional repairs that may take place. And you can see by this projection, this is also a sustainable funding source 5 years and beyond. Student athletic fees. Again, we should probably look at this, maybe make a slight adjustment down. However, we've had a consistent track record of students participating. We did see a drop in indoor track this year, which we haven't seen before. But by including middle school students, it's been pretty consistent over the last several years. And again, we budget $141,000 annually, and we see this as a sustainable account going forward. Athletic revolving, these are our gate receipts. Again, we use just $11,000 from this account, and we also see this as a sustainable account going forward. Preschool revolving, we charge typical students a fee to participate in our preschool. It's been a very consistent account throughout the years, and we see this as sustainable going forward as well.
Where are the numbers with trends on the pre-K? Have they consistently, because I know the kindergarten class you're projecting for next year is what, set in the 70s? 78? So are you seeing pre-K
Kindergarten,
reflective of that also?
so the numbers in FY18, we had 19 half-day preschool students and 7 full-day. In FY19, we had 17 half-day and 7 full. And in FY20, we have 16 half-day and 8 full. So it's been pretty consistent. And the last slide, and again, I think for this body and for administration, this is our best guess in January. Like we do every year, we'll have a better idea of where our revenues are in May and June and where we end up and what we'll have remaining in the budget. But we took a stab at providing 4-year projections, and obviously we're going to get feedback from the board about changes and tweaks to this. But we wanted to give you an idea of a 4-year budget projection. So we went with the 4 main categories: salaries, transportation, facilities, utilities, special education tuition, athletics, legal supplies, and so forth. And we used the FY '21 budget as the baseline. And we used a 3% increase in salaries with no increases in FTEs. So if we had no increases in FTEs and what we present tonight, we increased salaries by 3%. Transportation, we use an 8% factor. For facilities and utilities, we used a 3% factor increase year over year. In special education, out-of-district tuitions, we used a 3% increase factor, but we also factored in students leaving and aging out. And to give you an idea, FY '25 is an example that's not here. That year, 5 students age out. And so you would see a significant drop in out-of-district placements in that year.
I'm still struggling with 5 aged out, how many new ones came in?
Well, I agreed, but that's a big year. But where does it,
I appreciate, that's a big year, but in general, we're saying the number of students has been relatively flat, the cost.
correct.
So I'm worried about pulling students out without any estimate of new students coming in.
I'm just pointing out that it's not even on this, but in 2025, that's a big year. Now, what'll come in the meantime, I don't know. As an example, the town of Douglas, they saw $1 million drop in out-of-district tuitions for next year. You have those years. They come. They don't come often enough. We used a 4% factor for the supplies, athletic, legal. And so the one thing I want to point out, though, and so if special education, we cap at $1 million, that would stabilize us significantly. And so if you look at FY '22, and all these factors held true, we'd have a budget increase of $581,000. If we're able to do the stabilization account, we would be able to reduce that number by $178,000. And we would be living within our means. Now, you could have other factors affect this, but stabilizing that out-of-district placement makes a big, big difference. And again, you see what happens in FY '23 and FY '24. The other thing you have to look at here is if we stabilize that and we get the increases in circuit breaker, that further stabilizes the school district. It allows us to not go crazy, but it allows us to maintain school choice and circuit breaker at a protective level.
And I think I would argue that it makes the variability of the special education more visible to the taxpayer. You're still gonna get the crazy fluctuations, but you're gonna see those fluctuations in the special ed stabilization, not in what's going on with the school budget. And how do you pull out of it? How do you pull out of regular education some years and put in others?
And again, it's a partnership between the town and the school. If this worked this way and we could use some of the circuit breaker to help backfill some of that, I think we do that. And we work with the town in that way. Again, it's one pot of money, and we need to work together.
You have in here the potential changes, that moving the district to 3 schools and eliminating the wastewater treatment plant.
Yes.
When do you roll those in?
So again, on the town warrant, I believe in May, is a warrant item to run sewer to the school. And that would take place sometime next year.
And would be operational sometime next year, so you'd have it impact
22,
22?
correct.
Does that seem aggressive?
I'm just going off of what Jim has told me. So if they do that, it's voted, and it gets voted in, and I encourage the community to do that, because the cost of operating that system is in excess of $130,000, some years $150,000 to operate that system, and it's at end of life. So you're gonna pay one way or the other. But I anticipate, if it's voted, that it could have a slight impact on 21, but it's really 22 where we could see an additional $130,000 that we can reallocate to other services in the school system.
And the move to 3 schools, you would have that impact the projected 22.
22 as well, correct. Do I see a large savings there? I see that as a redistribution of resources.
And I'm apprehensive to count it too much without it getting to the committee and the committee actually having discussions about and votes on. I don't know where people land, but I do worry about having financial impact of that transition without.
We haven't factored any of this in. This is a wouldn't that be nice scenario, but we're not factoring any of that in our numbers.
Nor are we presenting that is a decision that's been made. That
We can't make any decisions until we know. Okay. Any questions on
I
the
don't know.
4-year projections?
Well, sure.
I know that you've asked for this, and if you think of anything in the future and you want to provide us some additional feedback, and any other backup data as you examine this, just let us know and we'll provide that to the committee.
And we're in the middle of the public hearing where all the folks in the public are asking questions and we're listening because we get a chance to speak otherwise. Are there questions from either of the folks who came out or?
I have a couple of comments.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do I need to come up?
So others can hear, otherwise is this moment of silence and then an answer?
Thanks for coming.
Oh, you're welcome. This is my happy time. My name is Paul Schaefer. I live at 10 Uxbridge Road in Sutton, and I'm a retired school business administrator. Budget time is always the exciting time of the year for business administrators. I just have a couple of comments. If you look at slide 8, which is the breakout of the salaries that Chris was asking for, I think what may help you is if you go to the Schedule 3 on the end of the year reports. So Schedule 3 is all instructional related costs, and they are broken out by building, they're broken out by regular ed versus special ed. So that may help you in terms of looking at your salaries, and I know Nancy knows where that is, so she can get at that. I think my general comment is Ted hasn't really, he's been kind. In looking at all the headlines that we've seen about education over the last 60, 90 days with the governance budget, for all intents and purposes, Sutton has been level funded on their Chapter 70 over the last 4 or 5 years. And so but all the public sees is the big headlines, $3 billion increase in education aid. And so, well, it's not coming to Sutton.
No.
And I think we need to get that message out because coming to town meeting, people are going to think that we got a big, huge influx of state aid where we haven't. And because there are going to be some hard decisions coming. And you need to be able to buttress not necessarily against it, but explain it that it's not there. And you guys should be contacting Representative McKenna and Senator Fatman as well, because now it's in their court in terms of what they're going to do. In looking at the presentation from my historical perspective, all this looks reasonable, brings back memories of having to do the same thing in terms of okay, where can we whittle? There aren't really many other places that you can whittle, but it's going to take a significant lobbying effort on the part of the towns with their state representatives, because now is the time where they can be generous. One other recommendation I think that would emphasize possibly the special education out-of-district tuition fluctuation we saw on that one slide. I think if you put the number of students that are with that number, the year that I retired from my school district, we had a new student that just moved in from out of state, and believe it or not, between tuition and transportation, it was $400,000. No way to plan for that. And the stabilization fund sounds wonderful, and I'm sure that's going to work. But visually, if you want to show the public the volatility of the sped, so the number of students could actually have gone down and your cost went up $500,000. Well, that's because you're right, the acuity of the students can be phenomenal. So those are my comments. Good luck.
That's
Thank you,
really
Paul. Thank you
appreciated.
for coming
Thank
in.
you.
Really, thank you.
The only reason why to answer is, I've always been hesitant because we're such a small community, and I don't want to identify, but if you just put a number out there, I think it's probably safe just to say it's 15 kids, 14 kids, 17 kids,
You
whatever
don't
it
have
is.
to say what grade they're
We
in.
don't-
You
we
have
don't
to
say
what
anything.
school.
We can just put a number on it.
number.
Yeah.
Frank-
Yep.
Frankly, the numbers you were giving are in this presentation tonight. You had mentioned an example of one.
Yes.
And to me, it feels like we get dangerously close to the absolute wrong conversation, or people being able to, or trying to sort out who is that?
Right.
And it just isn't,
It's not right.
it's not
Yeah, well,
right,
that's
it's
what I
not
was
legal,
looking
it's not right.
at
It's
the-
not-
Yeah.
State and the state archives on those numbers, 'cause it's a flat number, it's 20, and, their expenditure was 1.3 million, and just, it gives people
Sure.
good thing, because a lot of these things, to understand what circuit breaker means, to understand what chapter 70 means, and what does that mean for our district, is half the battle to understanding how the whole rest of our budget goes. So,
It's difficult. It is a complicated process.
Any others? Tim's in the audience also absorbing. It's good.
I'm just waiting until we move on to the next.
Next slide.
Okay.
So now we get to the bottom line. The bottom line is this. And again, it's January. The bottom line really is June, but in January, we're presenting this board with a projected budget of $18,661,000. We have earmarked projected revenue at $18,133,000, which leaves us with a gap of $528,000. Now, if we agree that anything over $1 million comes out of stabilization, that means that number drops by $221,000 as of today. And if we get an increase in circuit breaker and we have an additional $100,000, it drops down, and now we have a budget gap of $200,000. And that is a much more manageable, matter of fact, that's where we always kind of end up at this time of the year if all those things come to fruition. So, and then I am optimistic that if we can work out the school choice, the special education and district placements, it'll be easier for us to forecast our budget going forward and plan accordingly. And the reason why I say that is if I look at FY '22 and we only have to budget $1 million, and our increase would be within the $440,000 we've received the last several years, the $40,000 from the state and the $400,000 from the town. We would be within that budget. So this feels a more stable situation for me in all the years I've been doing this. But again, I think as Paul said, we have to educate the community. They have to know that, yeah, there's 1.5 billion coming in new state aid.
It's not coming back.
Sutton's getting its $30. It's $40,000 is what the governor's budget has for us. And the major urban centers, and by the way, they need the money. I get that. I'm not arguing against that. We're getting $30 a student. They're getting in excess of $800 per student. That's a significant change. There's a significant difference between what, like 85% of the districts are getting $30 a pupil, and 15% are getting the lion's share of that money.
That conversation reminded me of another item. I'm still on the email loop for business administrators. So apparently there's a new report now that's gonna be required to account for how we're spending the money. And for, what, $13,000 or $19,000? It'd almost be worth it to just give the money back, say, thank you, we've had enough reports, but I think there's gonna be a movement, well, there's gonna be discussion on it, I'm sure, because I don't really feel that the increase that Sutton got this year is part of the Student Opportunity Act. That's just the normal course minimum aid that we've been receiving every year through Chapter 70, so hopefully we don't have to comply with any more reports.
What I believe they're doing is setting up a two-tier system. One for the districts that are getting huge sums of money. And districts like ours, there's gonna be a short form that we're still waiting for that to come to us, which is due April 1st, but we haven't gotten it yet. And it's just gonna be a simple form reporting out our school improvement plan is what I believe they intend to do. Go back to the, I'm sorry, Nancy. Some questions, next.
So, what I struggle with is, I look at the first sheet of the appendix, the enrollment projections. How many kids did we send to BVT last year?
42, I believe.
42.
So we're predicting
So if,
6 next year?
so if we look at these numbers that are coming down the road, and I'm not saying we're gonna send 42, but if we send 25 kids to BVT, and there's a couple others that will do the private parochial schools, we're looking at high school classes of 80 to 85 kids, because we don't bring in a lot.
Correct.
What are we doing to make sure that we have the right, I'm struggling that we're having fewer kids in the classroom, but we're not changing anything in the school. We can offer halftime classes and that thing's that way, but we're offering classes now, and there could be 20 kids in a class, and then we're gonna do the same thing, we're only gonna have 15 kids in a class. Yeah, I mean, to me, you're not saving money, you're not allocating money the right way. The school system has to shrink as enrollment shrinks. We gotta look at that. That's gotta be included in the projections down the road. We can't lean solely on out-of-district special education, and complain that those numbers are, and they fluctuate, I understand that, and we need to provide that service. But we've gotta look at the other side of this and say, we can't keep doing the same old with the same number of people when we've got less kids in the staff, less kids in the school. That's gotta be part of this whole budget consideration looking down the road, and we're not doing that.
Well, I would say that that's why we have a restructuring committee, and I do.
So when we restructure, are we gonna lose staff?
Well, I don't know the answer to that until we do the analysis. But I will say this. What you're really talking about is the high school, correct?
Well, that's the numbers that are coming in. I mean,
Right, so because in the elementary school, we've made a commitment
correct,
to keep the class sizes where they are.
yes.
In the middle school, we just have one team per grade in our middle school.
Correct.
And we're actually sharing staff between the middle and high school currently. And so, to your point, it really comes down to what happens when it's 85 in each grade at the high school?
Yeah.
And then, is there a different configuration, and is it possible to run the school with a few less teachers in the high school? And that's a legitimate question to ask.
It's not just that, it's, you're also gonna have reduced bus fees, you're gonna have reduced athletic fees, you're gonna have reduced parking fees, but everything else is gonna go up. You still gotta operate the school and heat the school, whether you have 320 kids in it or you have 420 kids in it. You're not gonna change the temperature of the school, you're not gonna turn lights off. So,
I would argue, though, that the revolving accounts are a very small piece of the pie. But
But you
But
made the
nonetheless,
statement that we rely on these and that they're healthy. Well, they aren't gonna remain that same way. And over time, we tend to take money from certain ones to pay for things.
Sure.
We've gotta be aware of that we can't just level estimate these things. Cause our enrollment says it's not gonna be that way.
Right.
So let's
But I would
trend
argue,
it
though,
down.
that over the next 4 years, we're not going to be depleting those accounts. Even if we have 10,000 less in what we receive in bus fees per year.
Okay, but, I mean, this isn't a 4-year picture. This is perpetual. This continues. So it's gotta be, you've gotta get in the right direction now and start focusing that way. Because at some point, the economy's gonna change and there's gonna be a cliff again.
I would
Then what?
argue that this report does exactly that. Now, we can disagree about the estimates, and you're right. We're not going to receive $55,000 in bus fees 3 years from now. It'll probably be closer to 45,000. And you can look at the parking lot revolving.
So I would tend to agree with you in that the revolving accounts that we were looking at, if we have a better estimate and they trend down, we should get the trend down in there. I think it's a larger debate, and it sets up the larger debate better around what's the minimum on the school, if, on something like the high school.
Right.
Are we at the number of teachers and offerings that we think is a minimum, or do we have to cut there?
But
But I
that should
think
all
that
play in.
conversation sort of comes from better trending in the sheets that are here now.
But this is part of that bigger picture
This
called
is
strategic planning.
Exactly. We talk about strategic planning, but
We know
strategic planning isn't 3 years or 5 years.
it's-
So
It's even looking further down the road.
We've
And
got
we have
12
numbers
years
that
worth
show us where we're heading.
I agree with you.
So-
I think that this presentation, the trending in the revolving accounts, for me personally, I thought in the discussion we had suggested and would like to see those trends more closely resemble your best guess, which is sort of where you said 3 years from now, it's probably 45. Whatever those numbers you think best portray that.
Okay, but we're projecting numbers in here, salaries that are going up and up and up, and enrollment's going down, down, down.
Yeah.
There's gonna be that cliff too, yeah.
That doesn't bode well long-term.
That's why everything needs to be fair game when we come to doing this.
So I guess, first off, I think it's the first time we've had a 5-year projection like this that at least makes it easier to have this much of the conversation. Secondly, I don't know that we're in a position where we're gonna start cutting salaries.
I'm
or
not saying
cutting-
that, but I'm saying you've gotta start thinking about right-sizing the school with what you have in the school. And I'm not seeing that here.
And I would argue that,
Sorry,
no, I'm sorry.
where would you wanna see that in here?
I wanna see I wanna see us start to factor in enrollment in our thought process, and I don't see that happening.
So in the revolving accounts, it would go into
Not just the
that.
revolving accounts,
You
but
wanna
everything
see-
we
you
do.
wanna see it in the spending also.
Yes.
Well, and I mean, the argument could go the other way. We had a couple years where we did cut, and we felt like we were stressing some of the classrooms. We ended up adding personnel in the lower grades. Similarly, in the high school, we could get a bump, but if numbers continue, 70s, 80s for kindergarten, yeah, we got to think about that. But we also don't want a situation where we're trying to reduce those numbers and then a year or two later, trying to find a way to reincorporate that.
What have we
But I-
seen over the past couple of years? Kids fleeing to BVT because they can't get what they want here. And these numbers aren't reflecting that.
And there's various reasons for that. It's offerings, sometimes it's the social design of that particular grade. It can be athletics, there's a lot of reasons. I see a lot of people moving in around my neighborhood, a lot of young kids, new families to the town, so it's tough to quickly say. I mean, we might find people choose this town over one of our neighboring towns.
Right, but we also need to, with this whole strategic plan, I mean, we're creating a new vision and new
Yeah.
goals for the district. So we've gotta have all of these things aligned, which is why, when I wrote this, we're trying to make our system more befitting of what kids need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are those goals? How are we gonna achieve them? And as I said to Ted before, nothing should be off the table. Personnel should be on the table. Everything we do should be looked at under a microscope if we want to become more effective and efficient at what we do. And that, I think, is what gets to Bruce's thing, which is how can we be more efficient with what we're doing?
I agree. I think this brings it to light even more so, and the conversations do need to happen.
Well, you just look at that slide. Now, 116 is going to be 85. So I missed that. But then you look at 5th through 8th, and you see a clear, I mean, that's what we're facing. And so I don't want you to think for 1 minute that I don't go around the high school, and I don't go around the middle school, and I don't go and look at class sizes and look at where we are. And having had conversations with Mr. McCarthy about, this gets down to 85 in a class, we're gonna have to shift some of our thinking on how we staff the building. That's 100% what we have to be doing.
But we gotta,
We should be doing it.
we should be doing it, and thank you.
I
should
don't
be
wanna
part of
wait
the
until it
conversation
happens
now.
to do it. It's, and that again goes to my whole strategic planning is, where do we see this going? So if we're looking at low hundreds for kids through 5th grade, if we're hacking 20 kids off a grade at going to BVT, that's conservative, I think. So say 30, so you're in the 70s for all of those classes, and then you've got smaller classes coming behind. So how do you accommodate that? That should be our thought now, not, oh my gosh, it's happened, what do we do? And that's been my whole big thing is, I want to feel comfortable that we have planned appropriately for that.
What I'm telling you is it's not quite that simple. You do have to offer X amount of classes per period to make the schedule work. And there are contractual obligations. So you're right,
As
at
I
this,
said, then that's something we also need to look at is what are we doing within our contract? And does that really work for what we need to do to provide our kids with the education that they need? So, like I said, I think nothing is off the table. So does it mean reworking all the contracts? It might mean that. And yeah, that's a big undertaking, but if it needs to happen, it needs to happen.
Ted, do you look at that 4th grade number and think about offering school choice specifically for 4th grade?
I don't.
Because that could be 60 by the time you get to freshman year.
Yeah, you're chasing your tail. We did that one year, we brought in like 12 school choice kids at 13 school choice kids. And then other kids move in, and what we thought was reasonable class sizes actually grew. I don't disagree with anything that's been said here tonight. I think we do, and we're gonna need to consider what we do in the high school going forward. But it's not quite that simple of just cutting teachers, because you have to make a schedule work.
Right, but it's the
And you
big
have to,
picture.
and you have to offer, you wanna make sure that we're offering the right courses and the right amount of courses for our students that we serve in Sutton. And that's all.
Yeah.
So I do think, we have to do a study and say, okay, how many teachers do we need to keep class sizes at a reasonable level and still being able to offer all of the courses for our students so they can be competitive to get in, because remember, about 90% go to college, to be competitive in that process. legitimate.
So there's gotta be some
Well,
threshold, so,
And you
as
get
far
the
as-
chicken and the egg too.
yeah, I mean,
Because
if we're
If we
chasing our
change
tail,
things,
it's a
you
big-
encourage people more to leave. You know, we're trying to add engineering and a
Right, but
couple
I'm
other
not- I'm
things to
not
retain
saying
folks,
try
so.
to take things away, I'm trying to say do it better.
Yeah.
How can we do it better with what we got? And does it still mean that we need all of the staff that we've got? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of strategic planning as far as how people envision the district moving forward. And then ultimately, yeah, we gotta plug in everything. How does that mean, what does that mean for building space? What does it mean for staff and staffing and staff times and school times and vacations and all of that? So there's so much wrapped up into that. This strategic planning, I think is, yeah, it's ever encompassing. But we need to finish that to know where we're going in order to be able to create the ultimate plan. Is just how I see it.
Yeah.
But we need to know what the ultimate plan is.
Other adjustments or changes folks wanna work on in this space?
So when does this get, what's the next step? What is this?
So part of the reason I'm asking, right, is we'll close the public hearing in a moment, vote a budget, and I think this really forms the basis of presentations with the rest of the town government. So that's really why I'm sort of poking at, are there pieces to this for next year's budget that we'd like to see adjustments in? And I think we've said, I'm taking it as at least a majority agreement, that the trending in the revolving accounts, we'd like to see that maybe a little bit better estimates.
Well,
Yeah.
well, all right, so my question is, when does this have to be presented to the FinCom? Is that
we
the
have
next
the
step?
It's either March or April.
March.
Last year was April.
Okay.
There's time to go through and make adjustments. There's always time to have these conversations. I think they make sense. From a voting on next year's budget, we're gonna try to approve that tonight. We're gonna have a FinCom. We should be thinking about how do we make adjustments to this
And-
presentation itself, and we should be seeing where do we put the conversations around, what do you wanna do with the big pictures?
And that's my question.
Yeah.
If this doesn't go to the FinCom for another 2 months, what's
we
the
can come
rush to
back
vote
and-
on it?
We're voting on the budget, we're not voting on the presentation. Presentation, we can adjust as needed. The budget is just the number that we're voting on to say, this is the target, the basis for where we're headed.
When do
Okay,
we owe it?
So, if I've learned nothing else in my short time here, we're gonna come back at next week's meeting, and we're gonna hear, this changed, or we missed this, or we double counted this, or we didn't anticipate this change, and these numbers are gonna change again, so I
It's
don't.
always fluid.
So,
When do we owe a
why do we
budget?
need to rush to vote on it now? Why can't we wait?
So, let me ask a question. When do we need to provide a budget?
You asking me?
If you know the answer, that would help.
The FinCom schedule, the public hearing schedule is set. Judy Smith has the dates, I believe it is the end of March.
And when do we have to have a number for them? Just that, the night of, we could still be providing them a number? I thought we
Gotta
had
give
to have a
something.
number by a
There is
certain date.
There is a date
So they
on
can
the
pre-
Yeah,
charter.
and I-
You have
Right.
to have your budget to the town administrator, the town manager.
So we generally, this is the night we vote the budget to get to the town manager. That's why it's set on the it's this date every year, right around this date.
I unfortunately don't have the answer as to how long we can put it off. I was running under, we generally voted it here because we basically backed everything out from the schedule. When you're gonna have this meeting, when we have to have it before you. I appreciate that it's gonna change again, so I don't feel particularly strongly if we've got an extra week. We can at least find out when it's due.
It will change
And even
every
after we
week
vote
for
it,
the
it will
next
change again.
6 months.
Would you like a motion to close the public hearing?
Just thinking the same thing.
Well, yes, I would.
Anybody else? Any more discussion? Okay, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing on the fiscal '21 school budget.
Second,
Tufts.
tough side.
Jerome, I.
Brennan, aye. Edwards, aye.
Clark, aye.
Thank you for coming to the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very informative,
That's good.
it's preliminary.
Yeah.
It may change, just like the town's changes too.
Thank you, Tim.
The next item on the agenda is a motion to adopt the school budget, as we've just had that conversation. I'm going with, at this point, if it doesn't happen tonight, if we do it in the next meeting, we'll still be within any requirements to the town administrator.
I don't know what the
Would it need to be presented again?
I don't have the time.
Yeah.
There's a timeline we get from Jim.
Right.
And it lists all of the dates that come out. Whether you vote this bottom line budget or not, we set the line in the sand. We have a gap. Over the next 6 months, we have to figure out the gap, whatever that is. If this board tells me, you know what, you gotta cut $200,000 out of this budget,
Without starting a debate around that yet, I just wanted to set the conversation around adopting the budget so that everybody voting that had a sense of whether it was imperative from a regulatory perspective or not. That said, I would look for, as we have on the agenda, a motion to adopt the budget.
I move to adopt the fiscal year '21 school budget in the amount of $18,661,286 as presented.
Second.
Any discussion?
Again, I know there's still more conversation, but over the years, I've seen this, we adopt a number and it changes. And it's kind of understood, and we've seen it change up through, unfortunately, some years, July, August, well after it should. So I'm in favor of adopting tonight to stay on schedule, knowing that we will revisit this regardless.
I look at the vote as an endorsement of the budget work that's been done. I appreciate it. It will change. I worry that the way the budget is presented, we almost immediately walk out with this assumption of, well, that's really what we think we need for next year, but we know we're gonna have to cut some. And I worry every year that gets lost somehow, that we just accept that fact.
Yeah.
And I think we're doing that again this year, in that we've got a budget, and if we can make a couple of these things work, and we only have to trim 200,000, that in some way, shape, or form it's lost in what was the impact there was.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
No other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Carries 3-2. Next item is the superintendent's update.
Thank you. So, at the Smithsonian Center, at the Simonian
That's the
Center
problem with the budget.
in the elementary school, the Diversity Council put on their second annual Family Cultural Night last week. There were over 100 students who participated with their families. It was well received. We had high school students participate from the Spanish club, from the Spanish classes. It was a great event. The fifth grade band and chorus concert was held on January 15th. It was very well attended. The auditorium was packed. It was a great night. I think I mentioned this at another meeting, but Vanessa Hurley will be attending a conference in Texas to present our elective pathway to engineering. And on February 7th, there'll be a double feature movie night at our middle school with a barbecue and pizza. last week I attended a meeting with, with two senators, two state senators and three state reps. We met at the Ed Hub in Northbridge to lobby them to provide us with an additional $100,000 in funding for our consortium, our superintendent's consortium, to try to expand those programs. And the whole point of that is, as we're talking about tonight, we're a small district. And we're not gonna be able to offer every single thing, yet we need some real startup money to get this to start building a momentum. And so we're hoping that they'll fund us at $100,000. I don't know if we'll get $100,000. There's a commitment from all of the representatives from the 13 communities to support some funding for this program and continue the funding, because I think they see real value in it. This afternoon, we conducted 3 interviews for our special education director. We'll do 2 more interviews on Wednesday. There were only 7 total candidates that were licensed to be able to do that work, which gives you an idea of how difficult it is to find a special education director. We plan on having 2 candidates visit the school district in 2 weeks to spend a day in the district. And then we look to bring forward to the school committee a potential candidate after that.
So what will they do while they're in the district?
They'll meet with,
The day.
they'll meet with different groups. They'll do a tour of the facility. They can meet with guidance staff, regular education teachers, special education teachers. We'll have a meet and greet with parents so they get a real sense of the district.
And will you get feedback from those people?
We will.
Are there any internal candidates?
There are not. And the Strategic Planning Committee will meet this Wednesday at 6 p.m. We continue to move forward with that. We have interest-based bargaining training for Bruce and Paul and myself on Thursday with the union as we begin to enter negotiations with the STA. And I just want to remind everybody that we'll be here again next Monday for another school committee meeting, our first meeting of the month. And I would imagine we're not going to go through all of what we just did, but we'll provide this committee with the changes to the documents that were discussed here tonight. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. And that's all I have.
I guess on the,
You wanna go to the next item? Yeah. Let's go to the next item.
I guess on action items, one of the things that was brought up was to call in the presentation, we had it as sped tuitions. And there was a request to maybe consider doing that out-of-district placement. And the only concern I have about that is, does that add confusion with people going to BVT, going to Norfolk Aggie? That's why I worry if we put that in there, it's not a true representation of everybody out of district.
That says
Special
sped.
education out of district.
Yeah,
If it continues to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
special
yeah,
education.
that's what I
Yeah.
want, so
Yeah,
I just
can't-
want it, so it's out of district
Gotta be
tuitions.
both. It's gotta be sped
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
out of
Okay.
district.
Yeah.
The other question I had is, we had talked about getting rid of the library assistants. We'll still have a librarian?
We have a high school librarian, yes.
Okay.
And I'm meeting with her either today or tomorrow to go over ideas that she has on how to serve the elementary library.
Well,
Yeah.
and it might be worthwhile to investigate a partnership with the town and the town library. It would help kind of gain some insight for some of the students with the town library, but also that librarian might be able to come in and offer some of that learning that has been going on how to use a library and whatnot. So there might be opportunity there.
Sure.
The children's department at the town library is probably pretty quiet when the school is in
Yeah.
session.
That's where the truant officer goes every time.
I mean, aside from that, I would just like to say again, thank you to the people that showed up tonight. Paul Schaefer, that's a good experienced input, and that's always appreciated when, anybody from the town, any of the residents come and offer input or comments. We really appreciate it, so thank you.
Do we have a school resource officer?
Not yet. I
Except the library.
believe they are
You have a good job.
fully staffed, and it's just a matter of acclimating the new police officers to the town. And once that's done, we anticipate having, in the next month or so, having someone at the school. That was based on, we had our safety meeting, and so Dennis thought in a month or so, we should be able to have someone here.
There's still a police presence at most major events at the school. Like tonight when I drove by coming in, there was a police officer there. But it's not a daily occurrence where there's someone there.
No, they come in just about every day.
Yeah.
They come in, they check in, but they're not there all day.
Can you go back over and get a refresh or resend the calendar of events in terms of budgeting?
Yes.
I'd like to make sure we have a fresh copy of that, just to be able to answer. Also, did I understand there was a lockdown drill or an unannounced drill? Can you give us a
Sure.
rundown?
So, like I said, we meet quarterly as a safety committee, and I should have mentioned this, it slipped my mind. And so we've always done these where it's, people know it's coming. So we did this, we just said that during this week, there's going to be a drill. And we did the drill during advisory. So it wasn't where they're already in their classrooms. It was during a time where everybody was in and out of the building. I mean, in and out of classrooms. It was very well handled. Kids were ushered into different places. It was a lockdown drill. It wasn't a, so that's the first step. The next thing, and by the way, that was just middle and high school. We're gonna take it much slower with the little kids and much more age appropriate. The next step we're gonna do in the drill process is bring in the police and provide scenarios for the students. We're not gonna actually do a drill. We're gonna say, if there was, and I hate to use this, but if there was someone with a gun in the middle school, and we're gonna have people in classrooms saying, okay, you're in the high school, someone's got a gun in the middle school, what do you do? And kind of lay out these scenarios, okay, we're gonna go out and get out of the, we're gonna leave the district or whatever. We're also gonna do, another scenario would be, there's a man that we don't know who he is, and he's, in the cafeteria. What do you do? What do you do as a student? What do you do as a staff member? How do you handle those situations? And then the next step, obviously, would be to actually recreate a drill like that.
One more motion?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carries 5-0.